Hey everybody, today I'd just like to go through configuring a SSH key and uploading it onto a remote server. And we're going to do that by generating a public-private key pair on our local machine, adding it to the remote server by copying it over using SSH, and then going through into that server and hardening the SSH config file. So reasons why you do this would be to eliminate the need to log in with a password every time you go to log into your remote servers. So this can make it quite quickly, if you're managing, a dozen or 2 dozen servers, to have a single key that can log into all of them. I do this on my home network and find it pretty useful for managing everything quickly. But let's get into it and see how we go. So initially I need to connect to the remote server, and we'll do this by SSHing in onto the IP address and specifying root with the L flag, and this is to get in there and actually generate a new user, because at the moment there are only the root user is being generated on there. I don't have anyone else. So if we tail etc group, we can see that the last ones in the file, there's no extra users, typically started with the user ID of 1000. So what we can do is go through and just do a user add. We'll put out the M flag to generate a home directory. We'll give it my name because I'll be using it. And then if we list the home folder, we can see it's been generated. Next thing, we can set the password for this user. So password Scott, and then I'll use there we go. Do a secret password there that it doesn't like because it's too short. Alright, so we've got our user. Now we can exit back out and go to our local machine and go and generate a private public key pair. Now I'm going to change directory into the SSH folder because I'm going to be giving this a non-default name, and if I was to run this keygen command, SSH keygen, in my home directory or my current work directory, and give it a non-default name, this is where the file, or that's where the file will end up. So I'll just mitigate that by going to the SSH directory and running the command directly from there. So it's given the default file path and file name if I was to leave it and just press enter, but we're going to give this one a different name. So I'm going to call this proxy, we'll give this proxy1. So enter a passphrase. I'm going to leave the passphrase empty for this because I'll be using this at a later demonstration to put up a Nginx reverse proxy for my web servers and email server. So I'm just going to leave this because I'm using this on my home network. Alright, there we go. So that's been generated. And if we list that here, we can see proxy1's been generated along with a couple other ones that I've got. So what we can do now is SSH copy SSH copy ID, and what this is going to do is use SSH to copy the specified key to the remote host, and that way we can have the public key available there for authentication. So we use the I flag to identify the file, and that will be the home directory .ssh, and then it's going to be proxy1 pub, and we're going to push that through to the IP. Now, if you were using a different, or putting this in a different user's home folder, you would have to specify that by actually doing your typical SSH user syntax. You couldn't put a TAC-L flag at the end of it. It has to be done with the user at IP address. So we'll go ahead and run that. Alright, so we'll give it the password. Number of keys added 1. Okay, so I'm still on my local machine. We'll test this by going SSH to the remote host, and we're in. Beautiful. So now that we've done that, we can disable, well, we can go through the SSHD config file and actually harden it. So we're going to do a couple of things. We're going to disable the root login. So that's going to avoid giving the people the ability to SSH in as root without having to do privilege escalation once they're on the machine. So we're also going to disable password authentication. So it has to be done with the public-private key pair, and then we're going to limit the user access. So to do all these things, I'm just going to use Vim, go to the SSH directory under Etsy, and then SSHD config. This is where you'll find the daemon config. Right, permission denied. So we'll get out of that. That makes sense. If I were to run this command just with sudo in the front of it, because this is a new user, I haven't actually been put into the sudoers file, and that's just denied that. So what I'll do is I'll just change user straight to root. There we go. And vim Etsy SSH SSHD config. All right. What I'll do is I'll just go through here and talk about a few of the points. So this first block here under port, address, family, and listen address, you can specify what port SSH comes into and the daemon's listening on, and then the addresses. So I could actually localize this to my my home network where I'm sure I'm going to be SSHing from, and I'll probably do that at a later date. You can also specify the different host keys you can use. So RSA, ECDSA, which is the Edwards curve digital signature algorithm, and then also a different variation on that. So I'm going to leave that for now. Permit root login, so we can get rid of that and say no, and that'll stop root being able to authenticate in. Public authentication, pub key, enable that. Password authentication, change that to no. And then at the end, the last thing I'm going to do is actually add a new line on there, and it's going to be allow users and then just me. So only I will be able to, or the one user will be able to authenticate. Now you can add other users in here, but I'm just going to leave that for now. So I'll right quit out of that, and I will do a systemctl restart SSHD, which will reread that config file, and I will test it. So the first thing I can do is try and SSH in as root, and it should be denied. Permission denied, public key is required. So if I'll drop the flag, it'll authenticate under Scott, which it has done, and pop me into the remote machine. So that finishes it up. That's how I will configure most of my SSH remote servers within my home net, and that just gives an extra layer of security, but gives me the flexibility to SSH in quickly from any machine that I have that private key on, which is both this one and my laptop. Hope that helps, and if you've got any questions, just leave them in the comments.